Thank you, Brenda, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from here in California. I want to pick up today from or right now from the challenge that I think Brian gave us at the opening, and from the story of how it is that we make decisions that we've just heard, and turn to the question of, can we start thinking about what kinds of experiments might be helpful for us as society at this stage of the game. And so I wanted to take the opportunity in this just few minutes I have to offer three ideas, three proposed routes that I think could help with this biggest challenge, I think, of our time, which is building the strong capacity for our societies to effectively deliberate and solve problems together. Because I think if we can do that, then I would not be as worried about all these existential threats that we're facing. Fortunately, I talk fast, so maybe I can get through all three. The first of these ideas I want to discuss is something that's already been going on in a bit of a collaborative work that has happened from the education side here in Berkeley and with the Nobel Prize Foundation, which was the idea of trying to take this approach of teaching scientific thinking to students at all levels and teaching it for scientists and for non-scientists. And this came about because I think as a scientist, I was struck several decades ago by the difference between trained, experienced scientists discussing a problem that as they might do on one side of campus, and the discussions on the other side of campus where people don't have that same training. And I realized that there's a whole vocabulary of ideas and approaches to thinking through problems that was just not being taught in any course, whether it's in the sciences or not in the sciences. It's usually just taught by osmosis as you go through the scientific training. So these include all the ideas of all the ways that we've learned that we fool ourselves, why it is that we need tough critics when we're working on ideas, how to preserve rationality in decision-making when decisions also require values and fears and goals to be addressed. So if we are going to be more capable of societal deliberation and decision-making in 20 years than we are today, we have to really start to educate a generation in these tools of scientific thinking that are not taught in a typical physics, chemistry, or biology class. So the action item that I see coming out of something like this is that, so our particular education project with the Nobel Prize outreach is now beginning to field test multiple flexible modules that can be used at the sort of high school level curriculum. And we're testing this in multiple countries and with the International Baccalaureate School System, the IB system. As the remaining modules begin to get rolled out in the coming years, we'll be working with the OECD education team and the PISA testing team to reach school systems around the world. And so it's really not too early to start asking about other participants in this. And I could easily imagine that in this kind of conversation today, there'd be some interest in Australian routes to support and uptake this kind of work and looking at this style of scientific thinking education in the context of the Australian Department of Education's F through 10 curriculum or the senior secondary curriculum. So it seems like that might be an interesting way to take this up in the local context. A second approach I want to see explored comes out of another whole body of work. That's the creative work that's been done over the years to understand how citizens can effectively deliberate together. And for me, one of the more interesting such models is something called deliberative polling, which starts with a truly statistically representative sample of citizens. So it's not a self-selected group, and it brings them together with a panel of experts that represents the full gamut of views on an area. And the representative sample of citizens then breaks into small groups for moderated deliberations that then get punctuated by opportunities for the groups to ask questions of the experts. And the experts don't get to lecture them. They're just there to answer the questions while they deliberate. The interesting aspect of this work is that the deliberations lead to people changing their minds, and not based on who the best speaker is, but based on what facts people learn. So that seems very encouraging. It seems to me that using this model, our government agencies that are science-focused and our national academies of science and other professional societies could individually or together develop a standing route to run multiple of these deliberative poll events every year, within increasingly wider set of random sample public and highly vetted experts. So this, I think, is necessary because once upon a time, government was really able to put together all these values, goals, and fears with the consultations with the experts, and they were then able to design select policy. But today, the polarized public and the perceived need for the politicians to strongly push for one position doesn't really allow for true deliberation and compromised policies to be developed. And so I think this is a new need that we have that we wouldn't have recognized even 25 years ago. Now, I see this very clearly in the United States. I hear it in my colleagues in other countries, and I'll be curious to know whether it starts to feel familiar in the Australian context as well. I think an action item here might be taking advantage of the fact that Australia has actually some real history of using deliberative polling for controversial national decisions. I gather it was used for discussions of reconciliation, the Republic referendum, and minority immigrant relations. So perhaps the American Academy of Sciences could lead the way, but with a pilot study using this deliberative polling as a standard practice, attending any academy report concerning policies that do require both science expertise for the facts and public legitimacy for the values. And ideally, this work could be nested with pilots of the International Inter-Academy Partnership, so other academies of science can benefit from the tests of the idea, and perhaps some international policy topics could be addressed as well. And then finally, let me discuss a third approach that I think might be fun to consider today. It begins with the question of why is it that our democracies seem to be so much less able to function in these more thoughtful ways that we're describing. The latest version of the media landscape with internet, cable news, social media appears to be particularly damaging to our societal ability to think together and to take productive advantage of our differences rather than be driven apart by them. And so I think there's an unusual opportunity now because during the upcoming months, the European Commission's Digital Services Act is requiring the major platforms to be brought forward to annual audits. And among the platform's obligations and auditing requirements in this Digital Services Act are provisions that asks the platforms to assess and mitigate, and here I'm quoting, risks concerning the actual or foreseeable negative effects on democratic processes, civic discourse, and electoral processes, which is, of course, exactly what we care about here. But in order to perform these audits, the Europeans will need some way to measure the risks to democracy in these forums. I think that we can construct measures of the health of the public discourse that could make a big difference here. I mean, for example, you could imagine measuring the degree of isolation of polarized groups on the web, the rates of hate speech and negative language, the extent of understanding of opposing viewpoints. And if we could set our high-level goals in this way with these kinds of metrics, we could take advantage of the amazing creativity and feedback learning capacities of these online platforms so that they're the ones who are inventing novel routes to achieving a healthy public discourse. That would be a real change of pace to see that. And the action item I see coming out of this that we might want to consider is, I think it's much more likely that these measures will be adopted as metrics of the health of public discourse in these Digital Services Act audits, if several of them can be demonstrated during the coming year, and ideally even this coming fall, before the first audits are planned. And I see this as a real opportunity and a challenge for social scientists, nonprofits, and maybe ideally the platforms themselves to take on. So I think those are my few minutes to speak. Those are my three ideas that I just wanted to try out. And I hope this gets the ball rolling for some good discussion today.